Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PT on ICE Daily Show. My name is Christina Prevett, and before I get started for our pelvic podcast, let's say a big congratulations to the Morgans. If you guys did not see it online, Alexis Morgan, who is my co-division lead for pelvic, and Zach Morgan, her husband, who is one of our lead faculty for spine, just welcomed their little girl, Jacqueline. So huge congratulations to the Morgans, and we have another ICE baby in our midst. So today what I wanted to talk about was this growing undertone in pelvic that is anti-Kegel. And I want to talk about where it's coming from. Is it helpful? And what I see kind of needed as next steps going into 2025. So I have been very critical of this anti-Kegel movement, but I do want to kind of give both sides of this argument because I kind of understand where it's coming from. I just don't think that it's doing the benefit that we think. So, first of all, where is this coming from? There was a study that was published a couple of years ago that was looking at EMG activation of a variety of different core whole body exercises in addition to pelvic floor muscle training. And what it saw was that you get a strong contraction in isolation when doing a Kegel or a pelvic floor muscle contraction, but you get almost equal EMG activation with certain other core exercises like a leg lift or a plank. And so individuals took that acute mechanistic study and extrapolated that said, okay, well, if I'm going to get the same EMG activation with a plank or a leg lift, then I don't need to do Kegels. I just need to do more whole body core exercises. And I think this was a really big pushback of a very legitimate argument in pelvic that we have focused too solely and we have created an identity around being supine on a plinth doing muscular contractions around a person's finger, right? So I understand where the frustration is coming from. And when we have a mechanistic study like this that is showing, well, we can get benefit and strengthening to the pelvic floor with other methods, then maybe we just ditch the Kegel altogether and just go into these areas. So let's kind of chat and dig a little deeper. So the first thing that I see as a big flaw here is that we have an overwhelming abundance of evidence on the use of pelvic floor muscle training and specificity. And the majority of this is just strengthening. I would argue we would see even more benefit if we extended the pelvic floor muscle training umbrella definition to include coordination and relaxation, right? Kind of the full function of a muscle group. But we have Cochrane level evidence for pelvic floor muscle training. I put it on my Instagram, a systematic review that was just published on the 18th of December, saying that pelvic floor muscle training in isolation can help prevent stress urinary incontinence and symptoms of prolapse postpartum. So we have overwhelmingly positive and consistent evidence that pelvic floor muscle training helps. And if I take a look, I'm a researcher, right? I'm a researcher in rehab. If I take a look at of everything that we do in rehab, everything we do, pelvic floor muscle training has the most consistent and most high quality evidence of anything in our entire field. Anything in our entire field. And so to just completely dismiss this entire body of evidence because of this one mechanistic study is very short-sighted. Secondarily, right, it is very interesting, right, where we can maybe have these inputs into the pelvic floor and this indirect strengthening effect by focusing on big functional movements. But this was an EMG study. We have not taken that mechanistic work and pulled it into an incontinence RCT. How this could maybe have higher quality of evidence, and maybe I'd say, okay, maybe this isn't like strictly medical misinformation. There's a little bit more to this, is if the next step that we did was say, okay, well, based on this EMG data, maybe we don't need to do an internal exam and we just need to do a core strengthening program and see if there are improvements over time without teaching a Kegel. But here's the thing, most people are still teaching a Kegel who are anti-Kegel because the coordination piece is really important. And then we would have higher quality evidence. So we can't just use a mechanistic study and extrapolate when we have higher quality evidence saying something different. But we can use it as justification for our next step and say, okay, well, let's do a group where it's pelvic floor muscle training and isolation, these other strength training movements without the Kegel, and then a control. And let's see if that pelvic floor muscle training group or that core training group, did they both improve? And was there any statistical significant differences between the Kegel group in isolation and this functional movement group, right? So that would kind of be our next step. So we can't just take an acute study. So first of all, we have really high quality evidence for pelvic floor muscle training. We do not want to dismiss that. It actually does our industry a disservice because we are being evidence informed clinicians by using the pelvic floor muscle training and muscle contraction as our backbone. We cannot use a mechanistic study to extrapolate and ignore that quality of evidence. And then thirdly, when we are thinking about our studies, there is something to be said for isolating to the pelvic floor. If our clients only know how to contract their pelvic floor in these big functional movements, which is what they're going to use all the time, they're not going to go down into a leg lift to contract their pelvic floor when they have to sneeze, right? There's a specificity principle of the pelvic floor itself and its strengthening, and then specificity to the movements at which people are leaking, right? So if there is specificity there, then yes, if we have, squatters who are leaking, deadlifters that are leaking, then we want to make sure that we don't just do pelvic floor muscle training. We also put that into the deadlift because that is where they are leaking. We can't use these leg lifts and planks to stop a person from peeing when they are sneezing. And that is where that specificity and being able to learn to contract and close off the holes of those sphincters when they need to in standing without another core contraction, right? Because we don't need to contract our abdominal wall when we're trying to prevent a leak when you're coughing or sneezing. That specificity principle is a very big reason why individuals are coming into our door. Yes, we're going to have individuals with athletic incontinence. Yes, we're going to have individuals that have higher levels of incontinence, like runners. I see a big portion of those population, but many of them also leak with coughing or sneezing. That athletic incontinence has trickled into activities of daily living, AKA coughing and sneezing. And now we need to specifically attack the pelvic floor for those areas of discomfort and symptoms. So kind of where I'm at with this is we have this big body of literature. We cannot use mechanistic studies to dismiss said level of literature, and specificity is really important. But where do I think that they also have this right? Where they have this right. I do not think that pelvic floor muscle training in isolation is always the answer. I think that even of the studies that we have done so far, if we were to have taken that a step further and brought in the hip musculature, brought in proper bracing strategies, brought in a lot of these functional movements that many of these accounts are advocating for really strongly, and I agree, we would probably see a big boom in symptom reduction. And that's kind of where some of my research eventually wants to go. And where, when I am in multidisciplinary conferences and I say, hey, like, we need to take this a step beyond the pelvic floor, this is where I agree with the anti-Kegel movement. It's not that I'm not doing Kegels. It's that I'm not staying there very long. Like, it is my foundational step. I need to make sure that you know the coordination of the pelvic floor. You have the sufficient level of strength for me to then layer in other things. Additionally, I am not just giving Kegels oftentimes for my exercise programs. One, because they're boring. Two, because oftentimes getting in some of the hip musculature is going to be helping building a well-rounded program for the people that are on my caseload. And so I don't want to dismiss the Kegel, but I don't want to focus on it either, so that people always think that they need to be doing pelvic floor muscle training. But this anti-Kegel movement is like saying that you would dump an entire protocol because you didn't like the first exercise. Like, I don't like PROM after my rotator cuff exercise or protocol for surgery, so I think the whole protocol is garbage, right? I don't think quad sets are worth it you should be going right to squats after an ACL. That was another one that was in the examples in my comment section. It was brilliant, right? And so we don't want to throw out an entire protocol because we are over leveraging. We just want to use it as a stepping stone and recognize where we are going to go from there. And so to kind of bring this around full circle, where I think we are going in 2025, I think that being anti-Kegel and marketing on this anti-Kegel train is hurting your colleagues. Where my biggest thing is it is confusing to the consumer. I understand where it is coming from. I even agree on certain parts of the messaging, but when these big accounts say we don't need to do a Kegel, and then your client comes in and you give them pelvic floor muscle training, it can hurt the therapeutic alliance, or it can ruin trust for people who are in the one-on-one scenarios and taking in this information online. It is confusing to the consumer. I have so many clients who come in who says, I don't even know what to think because one pelvic PT is saying this and one pelvic PT is saying that. And like fair. It's not fair to them because the anti-Kegel movement is basically coming in as a big marketing trend. And again, I understand where it's coming from. I like parts of it, but my job and where I really want to help is the person who's having incontinence, the person with pelvic floor dysfunction who is coming into my door, and I see it as confusing. I now have an entire spiel, not for you guys as clinicians who are listening to me, but to my clients about how I acknowledge that is confusing. Here is where this is coming from. And here is why I will leverage a Kegel usually on day 1 or day 2 when you start working with me, and then we build from there. And so kind of to bring this into 2025, we need more research from this functional perspective. I would love to see way more RCTs that don't just dismiss pelvic floor muscle training, because that would be crazy to dismiss 40, 50 years of consistent positive evidence that says that we are very helpful as a profession in rehab, PTs and OTs. But we go beyond it, right? We teach pelvic floor muscle training, but we do so in the context of the system, right? We use the isolated contraction for things like coughing and sneezing, but then we also recognize that the pelvic floor acts as the bottom of our core canister. That is a force transfer system. It allows us to be strong, agile, quick, and do all the things that we want to do in our activities of daily living. And I hope that our research starts to back us up. We've seen this forever in clinic. And I just really would love to see that translate into some of our literature. It is coming. We're getting there. We're doing kind of some of the stepping stones. My lab is one of them that is working on doing this in the context of postpartum return to exercise, all this kind of thing. However, we're not there just yet. So I hope you all found this helpful. I tried to do a very well-rounded argument, knowing and acknowledging that my bias is that I think that there is more harm than good in this anti-Kegel movement, but also recognizing that there are some positives to what this group is trying to achieve, and people are listening. So hopefully that will pick up some steam, but with a bit of an asterisk signs and a bit of an it depends, where there is some gray area here. If you are interested in getting all of our research rants, thank you so much, Beth. We are actually starting our next cohorts for level 1 and level 2, our online 8-week course for our pelvic health division, January 20th. So next week, we are getting started. So if you are looking, we have less than 10 spots left for our level 1 course, a little bit more than I think 15 for level 2, but you have had to have taken level 1 to get into level 2. If you are interested in finding us on the road, the best thing to do is to sign up for our research email. So every 2 weeks, we have a pelvic health email that comes out. This research is changing very quickly, as you can imagine. I'm on here all the time thinking like, do. And so if you are interested in staying up to date with that literature, no, it's very difficult for clinicians. Every 2 weeks on Thursday, we put out a research email that is new things that are coming up and trending within this space. You can go and find that on the app under our free resources section. All right. I hope you all have a wonderful beginning of your week. Hopefully you guys found that helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, I will see you all next time.